Hey again, everybody. This is my third highlight video from the Sunway Sitges tournament, and we've already seen 8 of my 10 rounds. We're only going to see one game today. It is a game which itself, in its full glory, is just a series of highlights, basically throughout. Before I show you the game, let me just tell you a little story. 2009, maybe? 2008? Must have been 2008 even. I played a 12-year-old kid in the last round of a tournament, and I was surprised to be playing a 12-year-old. I was, a 2400 plus rated IM. And, I was used to playing professionals, other IMs, and a fair number of grandmasters. And I was surprised to even be paired with a 12-year-old. And he was kind of a prodigy, but I thought, okay, he's still 12 years old. I'm still better than him. And shockingly, I lost the game. Now, at the time, I took that loss quite badly. I was upset. It was how you've got records of like the best thing you've done and the worst thing you've done, right? Like strongest player you've beaten, weakest player you've lost to, biggest upset you've achieved or had achieved against you, blah, blah, blah. There's always some like IM or GM who's like lost to the youngest kid possible, right? So there'll be some 8-year-old who's the youngest player to ever beat an IM, and then what's the name of the IM? Oh, shame, 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 right? Or some 11-year-old youngest player to ever beat a grandmaster. Who's the grandmaster? Oh, shame, shame, shame. So for me, this was like an anti-record, right? It was like in the way that I and lots of other people used to frame such things. It was a record of embarrassment for me. Worst loss to the youngest player that I ever lost to, blah, blah, blah. And I was really, upset and singing about the game. And he jumped up super happy from the game and he was young, so he was exuberant. You could call it being like a slightly bad winner now, but like for a 12-year-old, it's whatever, it's normal. But, excessive celebration in front of somebody who's just lost it's not, I don't know if it's a huge faux pas, but it's not ideal, So I felt worse, and he was like running over to his mom, I won, look, I can't believe it, whatever. No big deal, but it stung and it hurt me. And I was upset to lose the game. I felt really crummy about it. I felt embarrassed, humiliated, all that. I harbored like a desire to, play him again and beat him. And many years or several years later, I played him again. And by then he was 200 points higher than me, a very strong grandmaster. And I was beating him all game and, so motivated, and then blundered, and he escaped with a draw. So I never got that revenge. And I was just to tell you that I was thinking about it in that kind of way, like I needed to redeem myself in some way for this terrible game, and if I could beat him as an adult grandmaster, then somehow that would redeem it or something. My point in bringing all this up is, in round 5 of the Sitges International, I played another 12-year-old and tied my humiliation record by losing to a second 12-year-old. And my feelings about it are as different as night and day from how I felt all those years ago. I thought I played fine in this game. I didn't feel any remorse about losing. I thought the kid played great. I expected that he could play well, but he outperformed my expectations for him, so I was excited for him. I thought, wow, people hype up a lot of prodigies, and sometimes they're the real deal, and sometimes, sometimes they're super talented, but it's but it can be overblown. Oh my gosh, he was so good. I was just thrilled and excited that he was that good. It's a great thing. So I thoroughly enjoyed this game, even though I lost it. And 10, 20 years, 10 and 20 and more years ago, I would have rarely enjoyed a game that I lost. Very rarely. I think it happened on occasion because I do have this side of appreciating great chess and chess as an art. as opposed to just a competition. But I still was so locked into my ego and had competitive ambitions and things like that, that it was kind of rare to truly enjoy a day where you sit and spend all your energy losing as kind of the results. But that's not the full result to me anymore. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed every move of sitting there and playing that game and trying my hardest. And I was focused and spent a long time. And I don't think I underperformed my capabilities. I just think that he was better than me. He was better, I think, at this age than the other 12-year-old that I lost to, which perhaps would maybe on its own take some of the sting out of it, to like just recognize and understand that your opponent's really good. I don't know. But certainly he is an exceptional player. My opponent was a Turkish player, Yagiz, Kaan, Erdogmus. He's 12 years old. As I mentioned, he is rated somewhere around 2499, something like that. And apparently this was his first Grandmaster, Norm, which I was surprised by because he made it easily. He was crushing this tournament. I thought, well, the fact that he's not yet a Grandmaster is maybe just a formality. Maybe he played so well. As I finished the game, I thought for a second, like, oh, I wonder if he's on track to make a norm. And I thought, on track to make a norm, he probably has all his norms and it just doesn't matter at all. But I think this was actually his first Grandmaster norm. But a friend told me that, they saw him, congratulated him, and he just kind of like, acted like he didn't care, and norms are not anything like a goal. So he has the same feeling as me, that it's just, GM is understood, and I think he's just trying to become world champion probably, and or just play chess out of love for chess without the kind of result orientation. But definitely I think the Grandmaster title and Grandmaster norms are just a formality for this kid. And if you factor in rating deflation, which I didn't really do when I considered, Mishra's record recently, when Abhimanyu Mishra became the youngest Grandmaster, I thought like, oh yeah, those tournaments he went to play are pretty weak tournaments. And I was a little bit less impressed than some other, 12 to 13-year-old Grandmasters. But if you factor in the rating deflation, then you have to say, wait a minute. It's like harder to become a GM at age 12 now than it was 10 years ago even, actually, right? So you put that in perspective. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, try to imagine 10 years ago, a 12-year-old rated 2570, let's say, instead of 2499. You would just be, that would just be insane, right? Just insane. So this kid, extremely strong. All right, and I did almost everything right, as you're going to see. I got him out of his favorite repertoires, and he already plays a very good variety of openings, but with this move order system, faking a really passive, maybe like Kali system with knight BD2 and stuff. But depending what black does with like bishop f5 or bishop g4, you can play c4 and move the game back towards a queen's gambit. I got him out of most of his favorite openings. And he thought for a while, and he wasn't totally comfortable. He didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't banging out his moves. But with focus and effort, he came up with great moves throughout, even in a slightly uncomfortable situation. So he chooses g6, playing kind of like a Grunfeld slash... Schlechter, Slav kind of situation potentially, right? I immediately play c4, challenging him to see, is he going to play Slav with c6, or is he going to take, or is he going to be willing to let me take out his center? And he just played Grunfeld style, and so I took, and I think the normal move would be e4, but I was also thinking on my own here and came up with an idea that is not good. I played the move bishop c4, which resulted in the comment from a friend of mine, a pretty serious misunderstanding of the Grunfeld. Okay, you got me. I thought, hey, this is a nice diagonal for the bishop, aiming at f7, especially if black's going to try and hit back with e5, which I thought in this kind of a line there was like a good chance that black would go knight c6, e5. I thought the bishop would be well placed against that. And, in some cases you can maybe play queen b3 early on. If black tried like c5 right here, maybe. I might have planned c5, queen b3 during the game. But I can see the bishop was not good over here on c4 and b3, partly because in the Grunfeld, and this is not like something I had no idea about, but in the Grunfeld there's knight c6 to a5, there's a5, a4 in these lines, right? Black's probably playing knight b6, knight c6, pushing the a-pawn in some lines when they aren't able to get the knight c3 trade in, which is kind of one of the points of white's move order here, is black's not going to be able to get this knight c3 trade, so we can sort of kick the knight out of the center at will, and it'll have to go back to b6. But anyway, the bishop's not going to be good over here in those cases, so I think preferable would just be a normal e4, kick the knight back, and then, knight c3, bishop e3 kind of moves. So I did this, and of course he played this move, and by this point I had realized that I had a mistake in my plan, and by that point I'd seen this and he found it and played it, and the problem is I wanted to play here and push past this pawn, and then if c4 takes, because of this queen a4 check idea, but it doesn't work because in this position here, b5. Yeah, I remember. b5. You have to take it because you have to get back this piece. Queen d7. White can't trade queens because they still need to recover their piece, right? This is a slightly surprising move as well. Two surprising moves, b5 and queen d7. But that's how a lot of tactics get messed up. While you're in your tactical operation, you've got this responsibility to carry out the operation to the end. And if your opponent throws some spanners in the works, you can't get distracted. You have to keep doing what you're doing. So black can play weird pawn sacks or, offer queen trades when they don't want a queen trade, and you actually have to just back off of everything. And after bishop a6, black has temporarily sacrificed two pawns, but I can't castle ever, and my queen side's under pressure as well, and I figured I was dead here, so I didn't go for it. That had been the original idea when I played bishop c4, but while my opponent was thinking, I realized that I wouldn't be able to do that. So I simply castled and played knight c3. Otherwise, if we now play d5, there's no queen a4 check, so black has c4, defended, and then taking on d5. So I play knight c3, and now finally I'm threatening d5. So for example, if black played knight c6 to increase the pressure, I can play d5. I might also be able to play d takes c5 in some case. In general, it's knight d7 back to c5, but I might be able to now that I've got the rook coming to the queen, to the file and all that. But okay, but he takes. I had a big decision, but pawn takes d4, knight takes d4 are probably both about equal, and I chose this one. Doesn't matter too much. All right, in this position, I actually thought that this move was more challenging for us than this move. If I played this move, I thought a fairly straightforward situation would arise, which is that black's going to develop these pieces to c6 and g4. Pretty obvious, right? The d4 pawn won't be able to hold. I'm going to have to force black to take on f3, play queen f3, and take on b7. Stuff gets all traded off, very much like in some lines of the Tarrasch defense, if we had flipped colors. And things kind of peter out pretty equally. I can show you one example of what I envision. Like here, if black takes on d4, I'm taking on b7 with a good position because I've got the bishop pair, so black should first bring this knight to the good square. That's much more desirable than putting the bishop or queen on that square. But I'm going to defend it now, and now, they're going to have to take in some order. What? I don't know, just some variations from my thing. Anyway, right? And you can see that the game is pretty equal, right? So that's kind of what I expected on e takes d4. I played knight takes d4 thinking I would increase the challenge, even though I realized I've probably messed up my opening and black is equal, right? It's two different kinds of equal. It's sort of easy to play equal that can peter into a draw quickly, and you wonder how, GM games sometimes end in quick draws. It's, they can make decisions repeatedly to play the move that's clearer and simpler, and they're each doing it. And there's nothing wrong with the move. it's a choice between two different equalities, right? But I played a move that's more challenging for both of us because I'm leaving this bishop unable to develop, but I'm also preventing this bishop from developing to basically any of the squares it wants to go to. So I'm putting a challenge on black as well as on myself. I'm stopping knight to c6 because I can take and mess up their pawn structure. But for me also, it's not obvious how I'm going to get anything going, right? And I actually had this plan, I believe, that I was expecting either knight d7 or knight a6 is kind of most likely, let's say. And I think my plan was to just leave d4 hanging because I was valuing the dark squared bishop so highly. And then, you would get here and here. If he does nothing, I'll play rook d1 with threats against the queen, and then I'll be able to finally play e4 and bring the bishop out because black will have to move the queen off of attacking the knight. And if black takes on d4, I was just, for one thing, I've got queen takes e7 in every case, right? You can just see my queen looking through to e7. But I was also thinking it could even be worse for black if I just play some initiative moves like bishop e3, rook d1, etc. So that was my idea, right? I'm setting a challenge to white and to black to play something more difficult, more challenging, harder decisions to make, what to do about this, what to do about this, how to develop the position, different sacrifices possible. Does black want to play e5 or not? Probably not, by the way, as soon as you block this bishop. I come into some squares on the d file. I'm better placed. My bishop is good. All my pieces are better placed. And the truth is, he was more up to the task than I. I made the game harder on purpose, and he was ready. After some thought, he played this absolutely fantastic move. If I were just going to jump around to a couple moments in the game, this is one of the moments that I would highlight. This move is just fantastic, insisting on getting the black queenside pieces to the squares they want, even if you take on a pawn weakness. And I think this is the pawn structure from the Topalov-Anand final game of the World Championship match, where Anand won with black. Topalov saddled him with the split pawns on the queen side, thinking it would be a slight advantage for him. That was the game where I learned an idea that Anand basically never put his rooks behind the c pawn to defend it. He just put his rooks on the b and d files and just played for activity on the neighboring files. Completely ignored his weak pawn, never bothering to defend it or whatever. Big lesson moment. Here, fantastic. He takes on this way. I basically, as I told you, I played knight d4. Well, now he can't play knight c6, but he does, and it's great. It's just great. And now it's going to be easier for him to bring out all his pieces, and I can try and play against those pawns in some long, hard to get to, far away situation. And yeah, I should still be fine. It is a downside, but actually, I'm the one who makes some small inaccuracies here, not him. And the very first one is this move, queen e2, and that's unfortunate. I was considering queen e2 or queen f3 at great length. And at some point it was like, I'm spending too much time on two moves that are probably basically just the same, and just kind of picked one at random. But queen f3 is good and queen e2 is bad. And there's another move that's good that I didn't see, which is queen c2. The advantage of that is that the queen covers b2 and c3, and you can play like bishop d2 without breaking up her coordination. So that's the main point in favor of, could have just come here. She can also help me fight for control of a4, c4, c5, some key squares to keep these pawns blockaded. Okay, so queen e2. I saw that black could play a5, which is a great move, but I didn't respect when I played this game. I've learned something from playing it and from thinking about it afterwards. Unfortunately, I didn't get a post-mortem, but I've learned something from the game since then, and I realized the more black can push this pawn, the happier they are. You're gaining space for the rook. You're increasing potential pressure on the neighboring file. The pawn is trash. You rather just expand with it, throw it down the board. So queen e2, obviously I'd seen bishop a6. I knew I would lose a tempo here. I knew I was inviting a5, but I was kind of on the fence does that bring the weak pawn closer up the board where I can blockade it and attack it, right? Because where's my bishop going, folks? We already know in a lot of scenarios it's just going to d2, right? And rook d1, bishop e1, and just tucked. So I was thinking like a5, well, yeah, I'll play, bishop d2, knight a4, and then it'll be in range where I'm actually attacking it and black has to actively defend it. But it turns out here, black's just expanding so fast. So rook d1, queen c7, and here I have to go queen c2 to stop a4. I guess I could have also played knight a4 maybe. But let's keep going towards some more important moments. Oh yeah, starting with this next sequence. So I play queen c2, which I think is reasonable. And now I was looking at c5, bishop b7, bishop a6. But I absolutely did not expect what my opponent uncorked here. And I think I also ancillarily looked at, bishop e5, just a little poking move to see what I was going to do with all this, and I was comfortable playing h3 for now. My opponent plays bishop f5, and this is a hard move to even consider or look at from black's perspective, in my opinion. Because white wants to play e4. Like, that's what I'm setting up with, right? When I've traded my knight off of d4, when I've moved my queen off of the d file, the very next thing I want to do is play e4, bishop e3, right? And go after this square. Then knight a4 and go to c5 or something, right? Or rook c1 and look for like knight b5, knight d5 kind of moves. So, honestly, had dude played like king h8, I probably would have played e4, right? Like, so this move here is just so unexpected when white wants to play e4 and bishop e3, and I'm impressed straight up that he even looked at this move, much less the idea he concocted with why he's playing this. It's based on a very rare tactical possibility, a couple moves down the road, and honestly, this can be overdone. But honestly, this just made me think of the game of the century when I realized what he was doing here, this game. Just the way of like playing for the initiative, seeing consequences further ahead, provoking moves. This move to me is just shocking. I apologize if that's another stupid, annoying thing to just bring up Bobby Fischer randomly, but that's what it made me feel. So he goes here, inducing the pawn. Then he comes here. Well, I'm also happy to put a pawn on f3 or h3 at some point. I do. And then a4, right on the opposite side of the board. And it's all based on the fact that if I take a couple times on a4, there's queen a7 check, regaining the piece with great pressure in the endgame, let's say. So, yeah, to me, the vision, the creativity, the feel for the whole board that he shows in coming up with this little 3-move sequence, it's out of this world. Seeing the connection everywhere, wanting to go for this, considering moves that seem to just walk into what white wants to do, amid all the other things that he could have been considering. It's just mind-blowing to me. So, okay, the most basic idea here is that if I come here, he's going to take here, hitting the rook, I think. Then I take, then he takes, then I take, check, here, here. And let's just consider this endgame for a second. And you'll see how I felt like unsure how to ever progress this situation, right? If I move my rook off, there's rook takes a2, I can't move the pawn. This next rook's coming to b8 or a8. If you go a3 to try and be able to move the rook, then there's rook b8 threatening your b pawn. If you defend it, there's rook takes a3 now. Maybe. That might be a counter tactic. We should maybe have some precision here. That looks like a full blunder. And even rook b3, the other move I was going to suggest, is also a blunder. Just freezing everything, but getting nice pressure on the queen side. But maybe this isn't as terrible as I thought it would be here. Maybe white could actually live in this. But I thought, oh my God, I'm just like, how do I ever dig out from under b2 and this pressure? It was like playing into a Banco endgame where you're not up a pawn, and it's the endgame of the Banco, right? So, oh my God, that terrified me. What I did consider was playing this version here and not taking the knight and playing now with the bishop pair. And I think I would play maybe like king g2 to threaten to take the knight by getting out of queen a7. I can't develop the bishop as long as b2's hanging, so I think I was looking at king g2 maybe. My analysis says rook b1 was something I considered, which prepares to play bishop e3. But I think king g2 might have been a little bit better, and I thought of it later on. But this was my first. This was like a dump of like a line I considered during the game, right? Was the knight runs towards the king side as fast as it can. I keep the bishop pair, which is like nice. You've got the a pawn. This bishop stops any Banco stuff. But now he turns attention to the king side where I'm missing a pawn in my pawn structure, and the knight can get over there, and actually my bishop can't transfer back. And I was like, how is this stupid knight hopping over there faster than the bishop can get around? Because as most of you know, knights aren't supposed to be faster than bishops traditionally. And I was kind of scared of this, and I considered between that and the option of taking on g4 like I played in the game. And neither was like really clear or really good. This extra pawn is not very good that white has here, but I thought if I'm looking at two options that seem fairly equal, close to equal, and I think in fact both options are pretty close to equal, just complicated, then on balance I'd rather have the version where I'm up a pawn nominally than equal pawns. Like, why not? So that was sort of how I made the practical decision in the end. I took here, he takes. In this position, I didn't know which rook he would bring to b8, but I thought he would bring one of the rooks to b8 as a way of trying to prevent me from developing this bishop. If it were white's move and white just played bishop e3, I think white would have the advantage with their extra pawn, right? And in fact, there's a move which I should maybe consider, which I didn't consider enough during the game, but I thought about it some more afterwards. Maybe the next move for white shouldn't even be bishop e3. I know this seems cheeky when you're undeveloped, but maybe a4. Planning to play a5 quickly when your queen is stopping the knight from coming to c4, and just expand that a pawn. It's your extra pawn anyway. If black manages to rope it up, I mean, it's going to be an effort. That's where your rook is. It's hard to develop your rook somewhere else. So maybe make use of what you have, the rook where it is, the extra a pawn. Maybe white should play a4 if it were their move, and maybe they'd have a great position with that move. Anyway, I didn't know which rook was coming to b8, whether he was going to play to just fully pressure the Banco side of it, or if he was going to look for holes in my kingside structure and keep this rook available for rook d8 or f5 or something like that. In the end, he played this rook to b8. To this day, I have no idea which one is better. But he came here. And now I just had another really difficult decision with a bunch of calculation. And this is perhaps my biggest error of the game, this next move. And let me tell you this about like the sort of what I learned from playing the game versus looking at it afterwards. When the game finished, I didn't know what I'd done wrong very well or how my opponent had beaten me. I was like, I had white, yeah, he equalized, position was complicated and interesting, but like what move did I play that was so bad? Why would I be in trouble? Why wouldn't I have ways to maintain the balance, maintain equality, right, in the position available to me? And I didn't really understand, like, why should that be? Why should I be bad? What did I do wrong? It was very hard to figure out, but I figured some things out during the game and then some things later by playing out some more variations and looking at just playing out the whole variation that I thought of during the game, but then actually seeing that position and thinking about it more can be helpful as well. And just sometimes you put the actual position in front of you and then you see it or evaluate or understand it differently than when it's a variation in your head. But here is a mistake that I made. It's bishop e3, and I was mainly comparing three moves here: bishop g5, bishop e3, and rook a to b1. I also briefly considered the move queen c2, allowing knight c4, and the move a4. And now I suspect that this a4 move might be pretty good. Here's my comment. I considered this move too briefly and maybe regret not doing it. If I could ever get the a-pawn going, it would be nice for the trapped rook on a1. Okay, I've already basically told you guys that a moment ago, right? Does that make sense? Like, we just keep this defended with the stupid bishop. Anywhere it goes, it's sort of getting harassed and it's not good. So just leave it at home and make use of this rook. Make him regret taking the rook off the a-file even, right? Do I have any more moves after that? No. Okay, so it's something for me to still analyze more. Interesting that might be a much better move. So let's see. So basically with the rook on b8, the question is whether or not black is threatening knight d5. That's kind of the question, because the rook's opposing the queen, and there's no knight c4 yet. And I want to play something like bishop d2, bishop e3, bishop g5, whatever. But the question is, is knight d5 going to come in, depending on what I do, and unveiling some threats against b2 and c3. And one option I will have is to move away my queen. And another option I will have will be to play knight takes knight, hitting the opponent's queen. So an example of something I feared was, let's go rook b1, let's say knight d5. So here, if I retreat because of b1, I think I would at least lose back the pawn, right? To black taking on c3. So knight d5, cd5. And now here, if I take the pawn on d5, there's rook d8 because I didn't move my bishop. I didn't move the bishop, so b2 is defended. There's no black taking on b2, but this rook is gone. So here I would have to go like queen f3, and here's like an example of a line I looked at. I thought black has a small advantage, like my b pawn is likely to die, my king is open and weak in this endgame, so it's definitely not good for me. It's also doesn't look totally lost, right? I might be able to finagle the e7 pawn, or I might be able to finagle some trades when black takes here, either of which might give me some reasonable survival chances, but it feels unpleasant. Bishop g5, some similar stuff. Knight d5 takes. Now I can take it with my queen because my rook's defended, but black gets rook b2. And then I considered this move because I'm nervous about the bishop being on my rook. Maybe I should be playing a4 and just wait for black to find a tactic. But, in my head, it was kind of like this. e6, keeping the pawn on this side of the board. The a-pawn's going to drop. And here I think I am really bad in this one. I think I correctly assessed this one as being worse than some of the other ones. But I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. So those are like the kind of things I'm comparing. And then with bishop e3, I had expected knight to d5, knight d5, rook b3, knight c7, rook e3. This is the extra thing that putting the bishop on e3 does tactically, right? Is black doesn't have to recapture the knight. If they did, I would have the best possible version of this position, right? My bishop's on this diagonal that's sensitive, and my rooks are connected, and white should be perfectly fine, I think. Rook b2 will still be played. But the point is here that black can go rook b3, knight c7, rook e3. And now my knight is super funky, right? And my pawns are super funky. But temporarily I'm up a pawn and we're in the endgame. So I've got some room to do something. And in this position, I'd found, I think, a very nice plan. a4. It's not that a4 was completely off my radar, you see, folks. It was like a findable idea for me. I had considered it in some positions, but But here, this is very nice. I was thinking like rook c8 would be the only move to stop me from just... See, I'm not defending all these pawns, the bad pawns. I'm just racing this one because that's what the knight... You see what I mean? When you've got an undeveloped rook and a trapped knight, make use of them, right? Like do something that makes the best use of them, right? If black does something like this and after a5 the game's already gone, I think it's lost for black probably. Just nothing to do. So rook c8 I thought would be the only move to challenge me. And then here, I was thinking rook d7 trying to maintain the knight and push, or maybe, knight a6 could come back to c5. The a-pawn's going in any case. This felt like a mess to me. Like I'm keeping the balance. And that's kind of what I had anticipated with going bishop e3. But I just overlooked one little in-between move, bishop e5. Just makes this little threat to h2. I can't allow that because I'll have 3 isolated pawns on the king's side. I'll never be able to defend those. So, whatever you want to say about queen c2 or a4 or any other move I want to play, once this pawn goes, I think the game goes. So I just have to save it. And now, same move, knight d5. And it's hitting the bishop, so I can't move the queen away. I have to go for the knight takes d5 lines. There's no queen c2 or anything here. I go for knight d5 here, here, here. And now black's got bishop e5 for free in this position. Remember, in the other position, I was just pushing a4 already. Here, my knight's already hanging. So I have to move it. So very, very precise, move. He found this easily, and it just shreds my whole idea. And therefore, I think you can see the bishop e3 is sort of a major inaccuracy in this position. Versus something else that's not as bad from the options. Okay, so he finds this, then he goes here, and now I'm officially in trouble, right? And in fact, the prognosis is like pretty bad. Like I'm borderline lost, right? I'm going to lose back my extra pawn in a second. I'll still be left with a weak pawn, and a messed up knight against a bishop with pawns on both sides of the board. So my first thought is black is technically winning at this point. Like one stupid slip. But that's how it can go sometimes. There are some positions where you make a bunch of slips and the position's still, salvageable and close to equal. And it takes a lot to really die. In other positions that just transfer into situations that just happen to be technically lost for whatever reason, right? And this is just a situation where, suddenly you're facing a massive bishop, and then I just can't compete at all. Terrible. But I think to my own credit, I put up very stiff resistance by my standards here instead of just completely giving up. I came here. Now here he plays the best move, bishop a3, which I didn't even fully realize was going to be his best option here when I was playing the game. I thought he might just go back to e5 or f6. But the thing about bishop e5 or bishop f6 is like any move like that, which looks nice. This is still weak. This is still weak. Bishop's amazing. But I just go here. And this pawn is basically immediately dead. And it reconnects the knight with the game. And I've got every chance of defending, it's better for black still. Has to be healthy pawn mass, bishop versus knight. But the bishop versus knight is not such a big deal anymore because we're about to play the game on one side of the board with limited, material for black to win with. So, yeah, black might be clearly better, but it's not clearly lost. So, fantastic technical decision here as well by the 12-year-old. I mean, he plays... Keep track of the checklist. He played an unfamiliar opening brilliantly. Fantastic decision with knight c6. He played the middle game with verve, finding bishop f5, g4, a4, just incomprehensible. Calculated the little details, noticed every slip, pounces on bishop e5 and knight d5 and going into the better endgame. And now we're going to play the endgame out, and you're going to see that he's going to check the third box off. He's going to play the endgame with like flawless technique. Both patient and precise and willing to calculate variations as needed. So another fantastic move from him, bishop a3. I trade off a rook and I eliminate the passed pawns. which makes it stodgier and less of an open board. Bishop's going to dominate the knight. So I thought this move was really great during the game, and it seemed so good to me. I had trouble thinking of anything else. I just couldn't see any really good alternatives during the game. I just couldn't think of other things to do. I saw there's like rook b8 or knight b8 or rook d7, and all my variations stopped after one or two moves. I just couldn't get into any of them. I just kept thinking rook b3. But I think actually what might be interesting, maybe rook b8. Black just plays rook e4. Maybe something like rook b6, and then if rook c8, then rook b8 takes. Here, trying to eliminate this pawn, get it to move. You can see the knight's back in the game already. So maybe something like this would be one idea. And then the other idea is just the absolutely obvious and stupid, just bring the knight back to the one square it can go to, hit this pawn, get into the game with your knight, And if black has to play c5 to save the pawn, then the bishop's a little bit weird, right? Its options are a little bit controlled. So, yeah. So I think this was, during the game, it was like a light and I was a moth. I just couldn't think of anything other than this. It made sense. I'm trading. These two pieces were terrorizing me, and this piece wasn't out yet. And it just felt like I'm trading off one of the pieces that's terrorizing me. I'm saving my e-pawn. This is no longer a passer. It was like a gift that I couldn't pass by. But it leaves the knight completely trapped, and he takes great advantage of that to still keep a really big advantage. So he trades rook a8. Of course, I anticipated this. I've got only one square. I consider rook c8, knight back to a6 and whatever, but he played a very strong move here. Rook to b8, which I had underestimated. And the idea is just to bring the bishop back to d6, kick the knight to a6, where it'll then be trapped by a bishop on d6, right? And go rook takes b3. He's trying to take the pawn without allowing my rook d8, knight e8 kind of counterplay, which we'll talk more about in a moment. So in this position, I had an important choice between rook d3 defending the b pawn, right? And the move I played in the game, e5, to stop bishop d6 and leave the b pawn hanging. And this was one of the more agonizing decisions of the game for me, because here, of course, I saw this, and then only one move here, e5, sacking it, bishop takes, knight comes back. And this variation completely solves and saves the knight. It becomes a regular, normal piece, and I just played the endgame down a pawn. There's no counterplay, and I think black should ultimately convert. But you do make the game really much longer instead of hanging on one decisive moment, right? Black's going to have to play well for a long period of time, which is in general the kind of decision I was trying to make more now, is the decisions not that force your opponent to find one hard move, but that force them to play well for a longer period of time. But in this case, I'm very happy. I think I made the right choice. e5, I think, is a devilish move. And my opponent didn't take on b3, but the idea was that if they take on b3, I give check, king here, and then close the trap on the king, threatening knight here, king back somewhere, knight f6, discovered check, and checkmate with rook g8. And this is just heinous masses of counterplay here, right? Where we're just destroying the king. And we're going to basically, okay, the king can get out of the box, but it's they're going to have to trade all their pawns, right? If they go f6, they're trading two sets of pawns already. And your knight's back in the game because light squares are opening up. Your rook's going to the 7th rank. If they play h6, which was my main variation, then I had this absolutely evil move planned. And I'm fairly certain Yagiz saw this, because the way he defended, so to speak, against my potential counterplay here was just e6. Nailing that pawn, stopping it from getting to e6 and mix anything else up. Even though in this position it doesn't really look like I'm threatening e6 because it lets the bishop back to d6, right? But the fact that he chose e6 makes me feel like he wanted to be able to threaten this, and he saw that the follow-up here on rook b3 was not going to be knight e8, king here with some running thing. But I think he saw that the idea was going to be g5 and then e6 next once the pawn's in position. I think he saw it. And here it's very hard to see how black deals with anything, because I even have a weird idea to try and win by playing like knight e8 check, king over here, pawn takes pawn. And what do you do about the f-pawn, right, if you take this way? I think if f6, I can play knight e8 check and then take on f6 twice even, right? So I didn't see anything good for black here. So I like this move. It's tough. It's both tough and it doesn't lose immediately if black finds a defense, right? I'm still able to prolong the game even here. I could still escape the knight with knight a6, but I played rook d2. So the idea is against rook b3, I've still got rook check and the knight coming into this square now that the e-pawn had to move. It means I have whole other kinds of counterplay with this knight leaping. So I play rook here. My idea is to play rook c2, which the bishop is stopping me from doing. I also figured that his primary threat here is bishop b2, switching directions. Now that pawn's there and coming to e5. And I didn't want to just drop this pawn and turn this mass into just a big happy party. So I cut off bishop b2. Plays king f8. Fantastic choice again. I mean, again, rook b3 could be heavily considered. g5 locking him in. Check. Here, and then we just step away. And, good luck dealing with this, right? Even if you, make this escape square for the king. What was I thinking? So let me just show you this funny checkmate, right? So the king can't even get out this way. But if the king goes this way, what am I doing? Maybe just force the king to that weird square and then get rid of the pass pawn over here. Or maybe go after f7 with knight d6, king here. Yeah, maybe switch to that. So anyway, I think here lots of difficulties for black to handle. So again, I agree with his decision not to take on b3 and bring his king towards the situation. So he's saying he's just going to calmly put the king on e7, so there's no longer rook d8, and then finally he'll take my pawn from me. So I have to follow through with what I was doing by getting the rook off of c1. I go here and poke this pawn, and he just has to concede c5, which limits the bishop and gives the knight some more air, right? And so I hit this spot here with the idea of coming out to c5. There's an important little tactic that if rook b6, I can take here, check, boom, and take the rook. So he's got to defend the pawn, and yeah, now if I go rook a2, there's rook takes b3. My knight hasn't gotten out yet. I can try going sort of knight c7, trying to repeat moves, but I think rook a5 is what I was afraid would hold the knight together. So, he's working with these pieces, but you can see it's still a huge fight. I go king f1, and what did I want to do eventually? I had a plan. I wanted to get my king to e2 and then do something. Now I don't remember. Obviously not cross the third rank. What was the idea? Is there some world where I can do this? Not that I see. Maybe with some variation I wanted to repeat with knight c7. I don't remember my idea. Let's say I just wait a moment for black, play king e2 for white, and king f8 for black. What did I want to do from here? Maybe I was just going to bum rush him with my king. Like this. And then just bring the king to c4 and take this pawn before this king gets here. Maybe that's one option. Other option could maybe be rook here and here. Oh yeah, I wanted my king close enough to deal with bishop b2 when I come off of this pawn. So like king here, rook here, bishop here. Just rook back to c4. Something like this. Bishop e5, rook e5, trading the rooks. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, we were in big time. I was in big time trouble here. My opponent maybe still had a few minutes left. But he correctly, again, I mean, I think every move technically is essentially perfect. During the game, I wasn't convinced. You know, I thought there was like, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm trying this thing, I'm trying that thing. You know, his moves seemed good, but I considered other moves as well. Now I think they were nearly perfect. Here's my last slip, king e2. I was in time pressure and forgot that with his king on e7, he could play rook b6. And the point is that if I go knight c5, rook c6, and I don't have the check anymore. So once his king came to e7, whether I like it or not, I have to go rook a4. And that's to be able to answer rook b6 with rook a4 as needed. Or even with knight c5, because now the rook's defended, there's no rook c6. So it's just obligated to go rook c4. And his king's getting close to trapping the knight, right? But I have both rook a4 to defend it in some cases and rook f4 to go after this. I'm not sure if I was losing yet because I haven't analyzed in detail to figure out if this endgame was lost or just barely holding. It's right on the knife's edge of that. But I made this little slip, king e2, and he just, there we go. Gone. So the knight can only escape here. Now he can take the pawn for free. I cut off the king. I was completely out of time to keep it from trapping the knight. And boom! Remember I said the main thing that would kill me would be bishop b2 earlier? Well, it really kills me here. Good move to defend this. Obviously, it could be tempting to get rid of this pawn. Just come here, control everything, go for rook here, go after this pawn. Might be winning, but he just locks me out of counterplay. As long as he defends everything, this knight struggling to get in the game, he can chase it, he can bring the king here, he can collect this pawn at his leisure here because his pieces are still stronger than mine. So recognizing that, he doesn't need to make the trades. You know, sometimes when you're trying to decide, do I trade a weakness for a weakness, whose weakness is weaker, who gains more from it or whatever, it can be hard to make those decisions. But one way to sometimes figure it out is whose pieces are better. If your pieces are better, then that may make the opponent's pawn weaker than your weak pawn because you're more in a position to attack it and to defend your own pawn. So that can be a reason to keep more pawns on and trust that you'll be able to outplay their weakness. And he does here, and it's definitely correct in this case. He again uses knight c5, rook c6 against me. Brutal. I have to take my rook out of position to protect the knight. And he could bring his king to c6 to try and take that pawn on e5. But he, as I said, it's a mix of like the restraint and the patience, right? e6 killing counterplay, bring the king into the middle of the board instead of trying some weird variation to trap the knight that doesn't quite trap it, or grabbing the pawn too soon on b3. But he's also calculating every time. It's not like he's rejecting those options on principle. He probably calculated a bunch of different options to try and trap the knight and, you know, played what was better because it wasn't yet winning to do so. And now he calculates and just runs with the pawn. So he grabs this pawn. I can't take on c4 yet because of my knight. I have to save the knight. Check. And he pushes. First move of time control. Just a dagger. The pawn is just going. And again, here, I mean, it could be very tempting to do some version of centralize the king or whatever. Rook c2, holding on to what you've got, maybe first, right? And then bring the king. Yeah, but c3, walking into this, c2, I can't take the rook or the bishop. Rook c4, stopping it from queening. Boom. The knight. And now I have to trade rooks for the pawn queens. But my king can't step over and eat this pawn. Just very, very precise calculation, right? So the only way to get the king over is to move the knight out of the way, and then he can lose the pawn but force the trade into the king and pawn ending. And black wins easily. King g1, e2, king e1, king takes g2. All right. Very clean. Perfection, right? And sorry for those who I've already offended by mentioning Bobby Fischer once in this video, but you probably didn't watch till this point anyway. But that was something else about Bobby, right? He had that like initiative and violence in the middle game, that not the like always trying to checkmate you initiative, right? But that initiative of like, you know, very aggressively and dynamically pushing for advantages. And he was also just so precise in all these endgames. He made all these endgames that looked like this is a clear advantage or this is a clear advantage. He made a lot of them look like it's winning, right? Like, oh, you find yourself in some random ending with a knight versus a bishop like me here against Erdogmus, you're dead. It's not just like, oh, you suffer or something. You're done. You know, all kinds of endgames that he made, it just seems so crystal clear with the precision of the technique. And I mean, what a game. You don't even feel like he's 12 years old. He's so mature. He uses his time perfectly. He doesn't play. Some kids play really quickly. Like there's some brilliant, you know, calculating machine and they see everything and they're just whizzing through it all really fast. But he's not like that. He doesn't play too slowly or too quickly. He used basically all his time, but portioned out. Was never under time pressure. Never had a ton of extra time left. Just what a level, right? What more can we say? Fantastic game, from my perspective. And if you want to see some great chess games in the future, I'm sure you'll be seeing more of his games, not mine. But for those of you who have some interest in my games, thank you. I'm flattered. And I hope you have enjoyed this series so far and will stick around for the fourth highlight video, in which I will, for the first time in this series, highlight some good moves of mine instead of just the good moves of my opponents. All right, see you then.